Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always ready.
Awesome. Well, today we're tackling a topic that a lot of you have been asking about, the Black Power movement.
Oh yeah, a fascinating and often misunderstood chapter in American history.
For sure. And we've got a great episode of Mr. Hutchings History to help guide our conversation. We talk a lot about the civil rights movement of the 60s,
Right.
but Black Power, which emerged around the same time, sometimes gets a little less attention.
Yeah, definitely. And what makes it even more interesting, I think, is that it was, in many ways, a direct response to the civil rights movement.
Oh, how so?
Well, some folks felt that the civil rights movement, while hugely important, wasn't fully addressing the realities of, say, northern ghettos.
That makes sense. Different challenges, different contexts.
Exactly. And so Black Power emerged in part as a way to address those specific needs and challenges.
I see. So it wasn't just about changing laws. It was about changing, well, almost like changing the mindset.
You got it. It was about changing how Black people saw themselves and their place in society, empowerment.
Yeah, totally. That comes across so strongly in the podcast. Like, there's this statistic that really jumped out at me.
But yeah.
Yeah, it said that in a 1970 poll, 64% of African Americans felt pride in groups like the Black Panthers.
Wow.
That's a huge number, right? And it really speaks to a real shift in how Black people were seeing themselves, their identity.
Absolutely. I mean, think about the time period, the prevailing stereotypes. This surge in pride was directly challenging all of that.
Yeah, like a reclaiming of their narrative.
Exactly. And a rejection of the idea that Black people were somehow inferior. It was a declaration of self-worth and a demand for respect and equality.
Powerful stuff. And that feeling of empowerment had ripple effects, didn't it? Like, it wasn't just a feeling. It led to tangible changes.
Oh, absolutely. One really significant outcome was the rise of Black studies programs in universities.
I was going to say that. It's like, okay, we're not just going to accept the traditional curriculum anymore. We're going to demand that our history, our culture, be studied and respected.
Exactly. It was about reclaiming the narrative, challenging Eurocentric perspectives, and saying, hey, Black history and Black culture matter.
Totally. And it wasn't just about adding a few courses here and there. It was about creating entire departments, entire fields of study.
It was a real shift in how knowledge was produced and shared.
For sure. And the podcast also highlighted the Black Panthers. They often get portrayed in a very specific way.
Right, often focused on the more militant aspects.
But their community work, honestly, was really impressive.
Oh, incredibly impactful. Free breakfast programs for kids, health clinics in underserved areas, educational resources.
I mean, they saw these needs that weren't being met, and they stepped up.
Absolutely. It was about empowering Black communities from within, building self-reliance. The podcast mentioned that in Southern California alone, they were serving over 1,700 meals a week.
That's incredible.
It is a real commitment to meeting those immediate needs.
Okay, but the podcast also didn't shy away from the criticisms.
Right.
Like, there were some who argued that Black Power actually hindered the civil rights movement.
Right. The argument was that by moving away from nonviolence and maybe alienating some white allies, it actually slowed down progress.
And some groups, like CORE and SNCC, did see a decline in support after adopting Black Power ideology.
It's true. And it's interesting. The podcast even played a clip of Martin Luther King Jr. expressing his frustration after the Watts riots.
He was questioning what it meant to win, when the community was left in ruins.
Right. It's a powerful statement that reflects those really difficult dilemmas facing Black leaders at the time. How do you fight for equality while also protecting your community?
Yeah. Tough questions with no easy answers. And it seems like the movement itself was also grappling with some of those questions internally.
Oh, definitely. There were a lot of different ideas about what Black Power actually meant, how to achieve its goals.
So it wasn't this monolithic thing, everyone on the same page?
Not at all. There was a lot of diversity of thought within the movement.
Like Stokely Carmichael, for instance. He was a big advocate for militant self-defense.
Right.
But others felt that building strong Black businesses and institutions, that was the key to achieving true equality.
And then there were those who really emphasized cultural pride, reclaiming that heritage.
So a lot of different threads, different approaches, and maybe in some ways that lack of a unified vision created some challenges.
Well, yeah, when it came to strategy, to long-term goals, that internal debate could create some obstacles. It's like, which path do we take?
Exactly. And, this all played out against the backdrop of, well, a really turbulent time in American history.
Oh yeah, we're talking Vietnam War, Cold War, a lot of social and political upheaval.
So you've got all these internal and external forces at play shaping the trajectory of the movement. It's a really complicated picture.
It is, and to really understand it, I think we need to dig into how historians have interpreted Black power, because there are a lot of different perspectives out there.
Oh, for sure. And those perspectives can really help us unpack the complexities and the legacy of Black power.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into those different historical lenses, shall we?
Let's do it.
So we were talking about different historical perspectives on Black power.
Right, different lenses through which to view this really complex movement.
And I think that's so important because it helps us move beyond like these simplistic narratives of success or failure.
Exactly. It allows for nuance, for a more complete understanding of the movement's impact and legacy.
So let's break down some of those perspectives. Where do we even begin?
Well, we could start with social historians. They tend to focus on the day-to-day realities of Black power, the ways it played out in people's lives.
So less about the big speeches and more about what was happening on the ground. Right?
Exactly. They're really interested in those grassroots efforts, the community organizing, the ways in which Black power addressed very specific needs.
Like those free breakfast programs and health clinics we talked about earlier.
Precisely. Social historians would point to those as prime examples of Black power in action, filling voids left by other institutions.
And that really ties into that idea of self-reliance, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It wasn't just about demanding change from the outside. It was about empowering Black communities from within.
Building those institutions, creating those resources.
Exactly. And then you have the revisionist civil rights scholars.
Okay, what's their take?
Well, they see Black power as sort of a continuation and evolution of the civil rights movement.
So not a rejection of it, but a pushing of it further.
Right. They argue that Black power forced the movement to confront deeper, more systemic issues.
Like, okay, we've got legal equality on paper, but what about economic justice?
Exactly. It was about saying, hey, racism isn't just about separate water fountains. It's embedded in our economic systems, our institutions.
And that requires a different kind of fight, right?
Absolutely. Revisionist scholars would argue that Black power brought those issues to the forefront, challenged America to have those uncomfortable conversations.
And then there's the Marxist perspective.
Right. They bring a whole other layer of analysis to the mix.
So they're looking at Black power through the lens of class struggle.
Exactly. They see the fight for racial justice as inherently linked to the fight against economic inequality.
So for them, it's not just about race. It's about how race and class intersect to create and maintain systems of oppression.
Precisely. And they point to figures like Stokely Carmichael, with his socialist leanings, as evidence of this connection.
So you've got these different groups of historians all looking at Black power from different angles.
And each perspective adds a layer of complexity to our understanding.
Which is important because, like we said, it's not a simple story.
And we can't forget the historical context, right? The Cold War, Vietnam, a time of intense political paranoia.
Oh yeah, the FBI was actively targeting groups like the Black Panthers.
Exactly. And that's where Cold War historians come in. They emphasize the ways in which the government perceived Black power as a threat, a subversive force that needed to be neutralized.
I mean, there's a whole other aspect of the story, right? The government actively working to undermine a movement for social justice.
It's a dark chapter in American history for sure. And it highlights just how challenging it is for any movement to create lasting change, especially when those in power feel threatened.
So we've got this complex tapestry of perspectives, all trying to make sense of Black power.
And I think that's the beauty of it, right? It's a movement that continues to spark debate, to challenge our assumptions.
But ultimately, I think the question that a lot of people have is, was it a success or a failure? How do we even answer that?
Right, and that's what the podcast really grapples with. It highlights both the undeniable cultural impact of Black power and its more limited structural achievements.
Like, it's this paradox, right? On the one hand, we see this surge in Black pride, a flourishing of arts and culture, those Black studies programs we talked about.
And yet, by the early 1970s, the movement itself had largely declined.
So was it a success? Was it a failure? I'm not sure there's an easy answer.
And I think that's okay, because maybe the more important question is, what are its lasting legacies?
And how do those legacies continue to shape our world today?
Exactly.
Yeah, it really makes you think about all those things, doesn't it? Like self-determination, Black pride, and challenging the status quo, how they're still so relevant.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's so fascinating about exploring Black power. You realize it wasn't just a moment in time, it was about planting those seeds of change.
Seeds that are still growing today, for
Yeah.
sure. So for our listeners out there, I'd say this: don't let our deep dive be the end of your own exploration,
Keep learning, keep asking questions. It's an ongoing process.
Exactly. Keep challenging yourself to understand the complexities of history. Because, after all, that's how we learn and grow, right?
And it's how we create a more just and equitable future. Black Power, with all its complexities, it forced America to confront some hard truths about race and power.
And those truths, those questions, they don't just go away.
Right, they might evolve or take on different forms, but they're still with us. They're part of that ongoing struggle for social justice.
It's like Black Power started a conversation that's still happening today,
And that conversation is more important than ever as we grapple with issues like racial inequality, police brutality, mass incarceration. These are all things that have roots in the struggles that Black Power brought to light.
Right. It's like it gave us a new language, a new way of seeing and understanding these issues.
A new framework for talking about race and power. And even though the movement itself might not be in the headlines anymore, that legacy is still so powerful.
So powerful. So as we go about our lives, we need to keep listening for those echoes of Black Power.
In the music we hear, the books we read, the conversations we have, because the struggle for justice continues, and remembering the past helps us build a better future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the Black Power movement. Hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, maybe even inspiring.
Thanks for joining us.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those deep dives going.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.